My name is Henk Mulder. I am the head of digital cargo at the International Air Transport Association. In this presentation, I would like to talk about ONERecord, which is one of our initiatives about data sharing, and we believe that this is going to change the way that information is being shared and communicated in relation to air freight and possibly other types of freight as well. So what is all this about? If you think about the way that you imagine the world as it is in terms of freight and supply chain, you think of hubs and you think of transport modes like rail or air or maritime or road. And this is very much what comes to mind when you talk about global trade and global supply chain and global transport. Now, in practice, the way that we manage the information associated with this global transport is that we have associated data with hubs, with airports, and with storage facilities, and we have associated data with the transport itself, whether it's air transport or any of the other modes. And of course, we have associated data with the freight itself. And this is how it is today in 2018. This is the picture that comes to mind when you think of electronic data associated with freight. Now, the reality is that when you remove that world map and the physical movement of freight, all you're left with is information. And so the initiative ONERecord pursues a concept of internet logistics. In other words, an internet where whatever data you need is available at the click of a mouse button or a call to an API or whatever. We shouldn't really have to worry about what the freight itself is doing. Whether you move freight from London by a truck to Brighton, or whether you move freight from London to Sydney, Australia, really it shouldn't make a difference. And so we should really sort of take abstraction from the physical movement of freight and just focus on the information. Today, the way information is moved is very much along the freight lines, okay? If you think of the way that your systems are set up when you are communicating with another party in the transport chain, you literally are following the flow of freight, and the information moves at the pace of the freight, which means quite slow. And the architectures that are currently in place are, if we're really honest with ourselves, they're very old architectures, sort of 1970s architectures, where we have client-server environments where IT companies provide us with big platforms that you connect to, centralized platforms. Or, if you maybe fast forward 10 years, you get sort of to the peer-to-peer environments where information is moved in hubs and spokes, just like the freight itself. And that's all very well, but this sort of plumbing isn't really suitable for the needs of information processing and data processing as it is today in a global. What we get now is that when you want to deploy some of the modern technologies like IoT or blockchain or big data, artificial intelligence, or if you want to get into cryptocurrencies, you actually have to deploy those technologies on this old plumbing, on these old hub and spoke data networks, which is actually awkward. And for any of you that are deploying systems like that, you realize that every time that you come up with an idea, you have to build a complete infrastructure just to get access to the data. Which, if you think about it, in 2018 is really bizarre. Because if you work in another industry, if you work in banking, or if you're an app developer for mobile phones, you don't have to worry about how you get the data. The data is just available, okay? And somehow in air freight, we've missed that development completely and are a little bit stuck in the 1970s. What it should really look like is an ocean of data, an immersive data ocean, where whatever it is that you want to do, whichever technology you would like to deploy to support air freight, can access all data from all over the world. Okay, that's really what we're pursuing, and that is really what ONERecord is all about: is trying to get an environment where data is simply available and we don't have to worry about it, and we can start focusing on the applications and on the functionality of these applications. That if you look at the environment that we have today, where we have, an airline may have a logistic cloud, or system providers are providing the systems to their customers. You have handlers, truckers, shippers. You get experts in cold chain. Forwarders may have their own clouds, and of course we have IoT popping up. If you think of that environment where nothing is really connected easily, and let's say you will be able to deploy an API on each of these systems, a common API. If you did that, then any of these blocks, any of these components would be able to connect to each other over the internet. And this is very much what ONERecord is pursuing, is essentially ubiquitous data access from whichever platform to whatever other platform via a common API, via a common protocol. One way to look at it, for example, is it's a bit like the USB key. Only a decade ago, maybe a little bit more, if you wanted to plug in your mouse into another person's laptop, there was no guarantee that it would work. There was not even any guarantee that the plug would fit, and that if it did, the right device driver would be installed. That's no longer a problem with USB. USB can connect any device to any other device, and that is very much what ONERecord is the ability to connect any system to any system without having to do system integration, without having to align data models, etc. So that is the vision that we are pursuing with ONERecord. So what you would end up with is an environment where any piece of data, whether it's an airway bill, as in the example here, or whether it's a box or a package, or whether it's an airplane, or whether it's maybe a space of storage within a warehouse, really anything, any item, any virtual item that we need in freight will be associated with a unique URL. And that unique URL you could encode into the barcodes, or you can just transport it via email or via FTP, or simply develop apps that connect directly to these URLs, and as a result get access to information. This is as simple as it should be. This is as simple as the rest of the world is living in. App developers, this is how they get information. They don't have to integrate with peer-to-peer systems or with client-server environments. They simply go to the web, call a URL, and get the information they're looking for. Is a data sharing standard, and we are focusing on different things. In concept, ONERecord is referring to a virtual shipment record, or in other words, the ability to get all the information related to the transport and movement of a particular freight. Okay, so a virtual shipment record, and there are three elements that we are focusing on. The first one is around data. Is to make sure that when we transport data via the Internet of Logistics using ONERecord, is that we have common data semantics, that we use common vocabularies, that we understand who is responsible for data. And we like to use something relatively new, linked data. It's not that new, but it's only beginning to be used at the moment. So in other words, the ability to link data to other data and create big data networks, that is what we're pursuing on the data side. On the access side, we're not really inventing anything. We're simply using the HTTP protocols, or the HTTPS protocols to be more precise, and transport data over the web. All we need to do is agree on how we post information, how we get information, and how how we perhaps change information. So on the access side, we are really just narrowing down the specifications that are pretty open today. And then, of course, we have security that is central. And it's worth mentioning that although we're talking about data sharing, that doesn't mean that all the data that is available in Freight today will be somehow shared publicly. That is not the idea. What we want to do is use the sort of HTTP, the web protocols, and have common data models. But the reality is that I'm only sharing data with a few parties that I need to share the information with. And that could be very granular, you know. It could be that a certain type of information I share with one partner, but not fully with another. I might share some of it. So certain information might be completely transparent. Maybe data like track and trace, you know, could be relatively transparent. But things like commercial data have to be protected and can only be shared with the contractual parties. So there's a lot of granularity in security, and things like identification of parties, who am I dealing with, the authentication or access to the network, things like authorization of access, things like that is what we are working on. And all of that needs a degree of governance to make sure that, you know, as the standard is being put out there, it is agreed with all parties, and if things change, we also need to agree on that. Well, at the moment we are in a phase of development. We're developing the standard. Then, of course, we have the test to make sure that the standard is working correctly, the ONERecord standard, and then we will deploy it to the industry. Although, in reality, it is not what we're doing. This sort of sequential process is too slow for us. We're going to a much more parallel environment. So what we have is a development environment. We have created a task force with quite a few observers which are participating in the development of the ONERecord standard. And in parallel, we're also testing it. You know, we're not waiting until we have developed the standard to test it. So a lot of parallel work, and we've created a ONERecord sandbox, which is an implementation of ONERecord where you can actually play around and try out the various data models, the APIs, and just to see how this works and if it works for you. And so the task force is using this to test the standards that are being developed. And then in parallel, we are running ONERecord pilots. There are already some initiatives. There's a group called the Digital Cargo Forum, which was initiated by Ericsson and Finnair and Air France and Panalpina at some point. And they already have done some tests of the ONERecord concept. And I would even go as far to say that they're using this in an operational environment. It's even integrated with external IT systems, external IT providers. So that is something that's going on. And we're actually kicking off other pilots with other solution providers and other airlines and other supply chain partners. So sort of, in other words, to make this happen, we are developing and we're testing and we're deploying all at the same time. Our timeline is that by the end of 2018, we should have a draft of this, a final draft of this standard ready, which we'll then submit to the Cargo Services Conference, which is one of IATA's most important governance bodies on the cargo side. This will be submitted by the end of the year, and then they will make a decision in March at our Singapore meeting on the adoption of this best practice, or this recommended practice, as we call it. That won't stop us from pursuing the development, the testing, and the deployment, but it's an important step to get recognition and to make sure this is a globally accepted do. Currently, the air freight industry is using Cargo Imp and Cargo XML for sharing data, and they're doing this using a messaging approach. And in the case of Cargo Imp, an EDI approach. Although this is clearly working because we are transporting the goods every day very effectively, the technology itself is very old. And again, messaging is really harping back to the 70s, to the pre-web days. Somehow this industry hasn't caught up with the possibilities of the web, and ONERecord is trying to fix that by sort of, you know, getting some agreement on how to use web standards in that environment. And rather than moving data sequentially from one party to the next, is just to leave the data where it is and share references to that data. That really is what ONERecord is. Now, ONERecord is not the only show in town. There are other industries, other freight industries, other modes, for example, where they may have other data sharing standards or that are being developed. We're aware of a few. And of course, the IT suppliers themselves have their own bespoke standards. Okay, so all of this has to work together, and the way that we're going to achieve that is by focusing on ontologies and vocabularies. And so, in other words, if in another environment some of the terms that we use in air freight may not be used there, they'll have other terms. And as long as we're able to exchange those terms and understand what one concept is referred to in another environment, then we can talk to each other. So that's really an important part of ONERecord, but also of the other shared data sharing standards that are being developed at present. This will lead to something that a lot of shippers are dreaming of, which is a transparent and openly accessible supply and transport chain. In other words, an environment where you can actually find the information you're looking for, so that we are shipping goods, that you know what is the status of these goods, where are they, if there's a problem, what exactly is that problem, and what's the impact on things like delivery. This is a this is not so much a luxury. This is a requirement of the economy 2.0. This is a very strong requirement of modern shippers. This is a requirement of the e-commerce. And in that environment, data is almost more valuable than the goods that we're actually transporting. Once we have that, we could think of freight in a very different way. We could start looking at virtual integration of supply chain partners. At the moment, we have this very sort of traditional supply chain. We think of the shippers, and then we think of the forwarders. We think of the airlines and the handlers. We think of customs, and then on the other side, when goods have been moved, we think of the thing in reverse. We think of the again of the handlers, the forwarders, and the airlines. The handlers, the forwarders, and then the consignees who take receipt of the goods. I think that in an environment where data is ubiquitously available and transparently accessible, we could start connecting parties and start shortcutting certain processes. Not shortcutting for the purpose of cutting out any of the parties in the middle, but shortcutting for the purpose of getting more efficient data transport. So, for example, if you think about customs, they're often at the end of the process. They receive information when the goods arrive at their borders. That could be advanced. We could provide information much earlier on in the process by connecting customs all the way to the beginning of the supply chain, all the way back to the shippers and perhaps even the manufacturers. We start thinking about our supply chain in those terms. We will see new business models appearing. We will see virtual integration, and we will see new processes emerging. This may lead to some disruption, but this will be positive disruption. This will be the sort of disruption that stimulates business. A global environment, when you have an immersive data ocean, you can start doing things like big data and artificial intelligence at global scales without the need to perhaps personally collect all of that data. This is an emerging opportunity. At the moment, this is not really possible. At the moment, you have to own your own data. But with the ONERecord environment, in particular, when people are comfortable with sharing certain non-critical information, things like, as I said, track and trace is not necessarily commercially sensitive. And if parties are willing to share that information, that could lead to very interesting applications and understanding of global trade flows and opportunities for optimization. All of this will lead to autonomous and self-organizing transport systems. It's something that is hard to imagine because at the moment our transport systems are managed from top down and requires a lot of expertise and requires strategic insight into how the global trends are emerging or evolving with respect to freight, with respect to supply chain, with respect to transport. As freight is growing and as the various modes are integrating by necessity, this sort of autonomous and self-organizing approaches are a very likely feature of the future. Now, this is all very nice, and this is what the future will bring, but it's about creating value. And what I think we'll see is when we have ubiquitous access to data, global access to data from our own systems, but also from other systems, we will see a new feature in air cargo. We'll see the emergence of an app culture. We've seen that everywhere else. You know, the ability to deploy apps, both as a app developer but also as an app consumer, the ability to have functionality where we want it and to change it. You know, at the click of a button, at the click of a mouse click. To deploy and to make use of the newest facilities and the newest functionalities. This is something that we haven't seen yet in air freight, but I think we'll see that with the emergence of the use of ONERecord. And we'll have big apps and small apps, you know, we'll have the big solution providers will make very sophisticated applications that will emerge and that will evolve fairly quickly. But at the same time, we'll also see a market emerge for smaller apps and smaller functionalities, perhaps even an open software culture where certain functionalities could just be shared without the need for commercial revenues from those simple apps. But in the same way with open software, that could lead to new opportunities and to new mashups of functionality, but also the emergence of new commercial entities. Okay, so this is something that we anticipate with ONERecord, is an environment that creates value. This isn't just about sharing data. This isn't even about moving data around. This is about what you can do with that data. And that is really where I would like to end this presentation. As we are developing ONERecord, we're working with our industry partners, we're working with airlines, with forwarders, we're working with customs, we're working with IT solution providers, we're working with handlers, we're working with shippers. And in these discussions, which are very exciting and very passionate, every time we try and explore one of the areas that ONERecord is impacting, we are discovering new ideas and new opportunities. This is very exciting. We are really looking forward to deploying this in 2019. We're actively working with those partners. We are identifying pilots for this, and one of the questions is, of course, is this work? We have to some degree a bad experience. You know, we have been trying to do e-freight, and we've been trying to do to promote the air we build. And although I think there is progress, the progress certainly hasn't been at the degree and the rate that the industry wanted it or that IATA wanted it. I think there's a difference here. I think that ONERecord is creating new opportunities. The return on investment in certain processes is immediate. This is not something where everybody has to embrace ONERecord for the thing to create value. This can create value even on peer-to-peer level. This can create value in communities of airlines and their forwarders and their handlers and in certain countries with their customs. The value is created, as I said, in the functionality that we can associate with this. The functionality is created in the rapid data access without the need to route information through complex systems. And this is something that is recognized by all the parties that are working with us on ONERecord. So I encourage you to certainly follow this trend. I encourage you to look at this innovation and to see what's going on. We will be continuing to communicate about this at various events that we attend or that we organize. We will try and get as much of this out also into the media, but most importantly, this is about working together. This is about you joining this, and this is about you working with your solution providers to make this happen. And this is really exciting, and I look forward to hearing feedback from you, whether it's to this video or whether it's through other channels. But let's do this together and make ONERecord work. Thank you very much.